This is Convict or Acquit. One real murder case, and you decide who's right. I'll give you the facts straight. Then the room splits. Rob says guilty. Convict. Tiffany says reasonable doubt. Acquit. Two sides deadlocked. And each one is going to try to pull you their way. You break the tie. Listen close, pick your side, and vote online. Then we reveal how the listeners voted, what the court actually decided, and whether justice was served. Because one life has already been taken, and another may lose the rest of his. Convict or acquit? You decide. Let's begin. 5 different people told the court the same thing, that the accused, Glenn Assoun, confessed to the murder. 5. And before I tell you anything else, you need to understand what that means, because it's the whole ballgame. No one actually witnessed the crime happen. No weapon anyone could put in his hand. Nothing physical. Nothing the science could reach out and hold. Strip those 5 voices away, and there is nothing left. No case. An empty parking lot, and a woman dead in it. Those 5 voices are the only thing standing between this man and the rest of his life in a cell. So sit with the real question. How do 5 people, 5, all say the same thing? That he confessed to doing it. That he said he killed her. But let me tell you about the night first, because before any of the voices, there was a person, and she's the one who keeps getting lost in this. It's early Sunday morning, November 12th, 1995, Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, just across the harbor from the city of Halifax. Behind an apartment building in 109 Albro Lake Road, in the back lot, where people park and nobody really looks, a woman is on the ground. She's been stabbed more than once. Her throat has been cut. One of the wounds severed the jugular vein. The medical evidence will say, later, that she bled to death, that the weapon was probably a dull knife, and that there were defensive wounds on her hands. I want to stop on that one. Defensive wounds. That means at the very end, in the dark, in the cold, she knew. And she put her hands up, and she fought. She did not go quietly. Around 7:30 that morning, somebody finds her. By the time the first officer arrives, she's been gone for hours. Her name was Brenda Leanne Way. She was 28 years old. And I want to stop again right here, because the record doesn't. The record is in a hurry to tell you the other things. That she sold sex on the streets of the North End, that she used crack, that she was, in the cold shorthand of a police file, known. The very first officer at the scene recognized her on sight. That's the word in the record. Recognized her. Recognized her as a working girl from the North End. As if that's all she was. So let me give Brenda back to you. Not the police file. The person. The people who loved her don't talk about any of that. They talk about someone who was full of love. Her cousin says she could spot you from a block away, and she'd come running and throw her arms around you. They called her Pitbull. She was small, and she was tough, and she worked her own corner of the North End, because it was her neighborhood too, and she was not going to be chased off it. She was a mother. She had 2 kids, and when she died, she was living with her father, off the drugs, off the street. By her own family's account, fighting hard to get herself back. She was somebody's daughter, somebody's mother, by every account, somebody's whole world. That's who we lost, and everything from here on is about who answers for what was done to her. The man charged with killing her was Glenn Assoun, her ex, her former common-law partner. And I'm going to be straight with you about him too, because both halves of this matter, and you can't vote honestly if I only hand you one. They'd been together about 3 years, on and off, some of it at a place called the 4-Star Motel, and it was not a gentle relationship. Witness after witness after witness described the same thing: arguments, screaming, fights that turned physical. One night, he threw all her clothes off the motel balcony. People saw bruises on her, more than once. And a month before she died, Glenn was charged with assaulting her. He was due in court that December. She was killed in November. His court date still weeks away. The people closest to her said it plainly. She was afraid of him. She was trying to leave, and he could not stand it. At the heart of the prosecution's theory is the oldest motive there is: jealousy. A man who couldn't let go, watching a woman rebuild a life with no room left in it for him. So walk the timeline with me, because the night itself is strange, and I want you to see all of it, not just the part that points one way. Saturday evening, November 11th. A cab driver spots Brenda thumbing for a ride. It's around 8:30. She comes to his window. They talk a minute, and he hands her a cigarette. Hours later, around 2 in the morning, the same cabbie picks her up again. A fare this time. And on the way, he says, she keeps scanning the windows like she's looking for someone. When she gets where they're going, he watches her step out of his cab and climb into the passenger side of a red SUV. A Blazer, he thought, or a Jimmy. Silver stripe down the side. The man behind the wheel had a beard and a full head of hair. Just before 4, another cab driver sees her one last time. Still out, still trying to flag down a customer. And then, sometime before 4:30, a woman named Barbara Ernst is asleep in her apartment, next door to where Brenda's body will be found a few hours later. Her dog wakes her, and she lies there in the dark and hears it. Mumbling, a rough whisper is how she put it. Car doors and tires spinning on the loose gravel of the back lot. The medical evidence would later put Brenda's death between 4 and 7:30 that morning. That's the window. That's the last few hours of Brenda Way's life. A red Blazer, a bearded stranger, a whisper in a dark lot, and the cold. Now here's the challenging part of this whole case, and you have to hold it the entire time you're deciding. Nobody saw the murder. There is no eyewitness, and there is no physical evidence tying Glenn to that crime scene. No fingerprints, no DNA, no fiber, no trace of Glenn at all. In a killing this violent, with her blood across that ground, nothing forensic puts Glenn in that lot. So the prosecution's case stood on 2 things, and 2 only: the kind of man Glenn was, and the words people said came out of his mouth. Let me lay them out, the bricks and the cracks in them, flat and even, the same weight to each. Start with the words. 4 people. Let's take them one at a time, the way a jury would have to. The first was Glenn's own nephew. He called Glenn and asked him point blank if he'd done it, and Glenn said yes. The second was a jailhouse informant, a man locked up inside with Glenn. He testified that Glenn told him how he did it, that he cut her throat and dumped her body by a dumpster. The third was a young woman. She said Glenn attacked her, and that in the middle of it, he said Brenda's street name out loud, Pitbull. She asked him if he'd killed Pitbull. He said yes, and then he said he'd kill her too. The fourth was a woman named Margaret Hattrick. She said she ran into Glenn out in the dark, near the crime scene, at 4:15 that same morning, shaking, strange, not himself, and that he told her Brenda was gone. That's 4 stories. There's a 5th, but I'm holding it for a moment. Now, think back to those 4 voices. The nephew, the one who says Glenn admitted it on the phone, had a long criminal record, and the prosecution itself admitted he wasn't a credible witness. The informant, The man who says Glenn confessed to him behind bars got a benefit from the prosecution in exchange for that story, a lighter road on his own charges. The young woman, the one who says he confessed while he was attacking her, gave a description of her attacker that didn't match Glenn. And Margaret Hartrick, the one who put him near the scene at 4:15, used drugs, told police that some of what she knew came to her through psychic visions, and then Margaret died before the trial ever began, so the jury never once got to watch her answer a hard question in court. And against all of it, there was an alibi, a woman who swore Glenn was with her, in her apartment the whole time. And now, the fifth voice, the one that splits this room right down the middle, the one that, depending on who you are, is either the single most damning sentence in this whole story or the cruelest coincidence in it. A couple of weeks after the murder, a woman named Mary Cameron was sitting in an apartment when, she says, she overheard Glenn Assoun talking, and she heard him say he'd cut Brenda from ear to ear, and that the tip of his blade broke off. Sit with that. Because about a year and a half later, a different woman, the victim's own sister, walked into a wooded area near the crime scene, and she found a knife with a broken tip. So you've got one woman who says she heard him describe a broken blade, and another who later finds a broken blade in the woods. Nobody disputes that Mary Cameron got up in the courtroom and said this. Nobody disputes the sister found that knife. What the two sides go to war over is everything underneath it. Did Glenn ever really say those words? And if he did, is the broken knife tip the one detail only the killer could know? A slip that gives him away? Or is it a coincidence so cruel it put an innocent man in a cell? That's the fight, and it's theirs, not mine. So I'm going to step back now and let them have it. We'll start with Rob, who will try to convince you Glenn is guilty. And then you'll hear from Tiffany, and she says he's not guilty. Don't go anywhere.
Okay, hear me out. I'm not going to sit here and act more sure than I really am, so let me start with the one thing in this whole case I cannot explain away. The one detail that no matter how many times I turn it over, keeps landing me in the same place. A killer breaks his knife. And then, a year and a half later, a broken knife turns up in the woods right by where he left her. Let me walk you through why that stops me cold. Weeks after the murder, a woman is sitting in an apartment, and she hears Glenn Assoun talking. And she hears him say he cut Brenda ear to ear, and that the tip of his blade snapped off. Now hold that thought. Because a year and a half later, Brenda's sister walks into the woods near the scene and finds a knife with the tip broken off. Here's what I need you to understand about that broken tip. The police worked this scene hard, and they never had one shred of evidence that the killer's blade had broken. It wasn't in any report. It wasn't something they could point to. There was no reason on earth for that detail to exist anywhere, except in the memory of the person who was holding the knife when it snapped. So when a woman gets up in that courtroom and testifies she heard Glenn Assoun say the tip broke off, you have to ask yourself where a detail like that even comes from. There's one clean answer. He knew the blade broke because he's the one who broke it. That's not a detail you invent out of thin air. That's a detail you confess. Now let me be honest about the weak threads, because I'm not going to insult you by pretending they aren't there. There are challenges in the prosecution's case. First, the nephew who said Glenn confessed on the phone, career criminal, addict. They had to arrest him to drag him into court. Next, the jailhouse informant. He got a benefit, a lighter road on his own charges. The other side is going to lean on those two hard. And you know what? They're right to. If this case were only those two witnesses, I'd be sitting in the opposite chair right now. A man staring down a sentence will say anything to anybody. I know that. I'm not asking you to pretend I don't. But that's exactly the point. It isn't only those two. Step back and look at the whole picture. You've got the nephew. You've got the informant. You've also got a young woman he attacked, who says he confessed in the middle of it, and used Brenda's own nickname while he did, Pitbull, and then threatened to kill her too. And most important, you've then got Margaret Hattrick, putting Glenn outside that building at 4:15 in the morning, shaking, telling her Brenda was gone, hours before a single soul knew there was a body to find. And finally, you've got the woman who overheard the broken knife. That is 5 separate human beings from 5 different corners of this story, who by and large don't know each other, who had no way to sit down and get their story straight, all pointing to the same man for the same killing. Now the other side has a name for that. Coincidence. So let's actually try their theory on. For Glenn to be innocent, you don't have to disbelieve one witness. You have to disbelieve all 5 at the same time. You have to believe that 5 different people in 5 different rooms on 5 different days each independently decided to aim the same accusation at the same man. You have to believe the nephew lied, and the informant lied, and a terrified young woman lied, and Hattrick lied, and Mary Cameron lied, and that one of those liars, out of pure luck, happened to land on a broken knife tip that then turned up in the ground a year and a half later to back her up. That's not one coincidence. That's 5 liars and a miracle. At some point, they're all lying stops being skepticism and starts being a story you're telling yourself so you can feel okay about letting go of him. And don't lose who he was to her. This wasn't a stranger who wandered into her life. This was the man charged with assaulting her 1 month before she died, with a court date bearing down on him. Sit with that for a second. She was the complainant. She was the witness. She was about to stand up in a courtroom and testify against him. And the one thing that could stop her, permanently, was exactly what happened to her. He didn't just have a reason to want her gone. He had a deadline. This is the man who threw her clothes off a balcony, who people said she was hiding from, who could not stand that she was leaving. And Brenda told person after person, in her own words, that she was afraid of him. The motive in this case isn't some clever theory a prosecutor cooked up. It came from Brenda herself, from the people she told while she was still alive that she was afraid. And his alibi? It was a woman he described as, quote, extremely good friends, unquote, whose account shifted, and whom nobody else in that apartment could fully back up. And then there's the detail that stops my breath cold. He asked her, his own alibi witness, the one person on earth swearing she was with him all night, whether she had anything to do with the murder. Read that back to yourself. Who does that? Who turns to the person vouching for them, the person keeping them out of prison, and floats the idea that maybe she's the killer? An innocent man doesn't go there. An innocent man has no reason to. That's a man testing an exit, quietly checking whether, if he needs to, he can point the finger somewhere else. So here's my ask. And it isn't clever, it's just honest. A woman was killed in a parking lot and left there in the cold with her throat open. and her hands cut up because at the very end she was still trying to stop it. She was somebody's daughter, somebody's mother, somebody's whole world. And 5 people stood up, one after another, and said, "He did this." The broken knife says he did this. The fear in her own voice before she was ever gone says he did this. I'm not asking you to be certain. Nobody gets to be certain. I'm asking you not to turn away from a wall of evidence just because the people who built it weren't saints. The world she lived in didn't hand us saints. It handed us the truth anyway. Come with me. Convict.
That's a real case. Tiffany, your turn. Why was Glenn not guilty?
Rob, you presented a good case. I mean that. I'm not going to stand here and pretend the other side is weak. The knife gets me too. The question was never, do you think he did it? The question in that courtroom, the only question the law put to those 12 people was, did the prosecution prove it? Beyond a reasonable doubt. Not probably, not it sure looks like him, not, well, who else would it be? Beyond a reasonable doubt. Because the alternative, convicting a man because the story is satisfying because it fits, is exactly how you bury an innocent person and feel righteous while doing it. So Rob says 5 voices. 5 people can't all be wrong. Fine. Let's take him at his word, and let's put all 5 under the light, one at a time, the way he's hoping you won't. Because a number is only overwhelming until you look at what it's made of. Voice 1, the nephew. Even the prosecution admitted he wasn't credible. Isn't it revealing that even the prosecution would not stand behind its own witness? More than 30 convictions, fake names to dodge the police, an addict dragged to that stand under a warrant who'd gone shopping for favors in exchange for talking. That's the first voice. Voice 2, the jailhouse informant. He got a benefit on his own charges, a lighter sentence in trade for his testimony. And listeners, there is a name in law for a witness like that. A witness so inherently dangerous that a judge is supposed to stop and warn the jury before you trust a word from him. Why? Because a man trading his words for his own freedom will hand you whatever words open the cell door. That's 2 of your 5, and neither one should move you a single inch. Voice 3, the young woman who said he confessed during the assault. And I want to be gentle here and careful, because something genuinely terrible happened to her, and she deserves nothing but respect. This is not about whether to believe her pain and her story. It's about one narrow question. Was the man who did that to her actually Glenn, the accused? And the evidence says no. She testified that her attacker wore an earring in his right ear. Glenn's ears were examined by a professional. No piercing. None. And around the time she says this happened to her in Dartmouth, Glenn's own sister-in-law testified he was living 3,000 miles away. That's not a small wobble. That is an identification coming apart in your hands. Voice 4. Margaret Hartrick. The 4:15 in the morning meeting, the supposed cornerstone of this whole case. Where do I even start? She first told police she knew things through psychic visions. She lied to them about her own life. She was smoking crack the very night she says she ran into Glenn. And here's how the sighting even surfaced. She didn't come forward with it. She was already in a police station, being questioned about a completely separate matter about a year after Brenda was killed. And it was only as they were walking her out the door that she turned back and, almost in passing, mentioned she'd run into Glenn the morning of the murder. The most important piece of evidence in this whole case, a year later, offered on the way out, about a killing nobody in that room had even asked her about. And here's the piece that should stop you. Hartrick's whole story depended on her being at a particular apartment that night, because that's where she said she was right before she stepped outside and ran into Glenn. She even named the woman she'd been with. So the defense called that woman, and the woman got up in court and said, "I wasn't there, and I have no idea who Margaret Hartrick even is." The one person who could have put Hartrick at that spot at that hour, the anchor for her entire account, said it never happened. Finally, Hartrick claimed she visited someone named Ricky Bates that night. But Bates took the stand and denied ever being at the apartment. 2 defense witnesses say Hartrick's story is a fabrication. And then, before the trial, Hartrick died. So Glenn never once got to stand up, look at her, and put a single question to her in front of that jury. They sat there and weighed the word of a ghost nobody in that room was ever allowed to challenge. And now, voice 5, the knife. And listeners, pay attention, because this is the one Rob built his entire case on. He told you it was unanswerable, that only the killer could know the tip of the blade broke off, so the fact it came out of Glenn's mouth proves the mouth belonged to the murderer. It's a powerful argument. It is also exactly backwards, and the record shows you why. Start with who supposedly heard it. A woman named Mary Cameron says she was in an apartment when Glenn confessed, that he said it right out loud to another woman sitting there in the room with him. So 2 people would have heard it, Mary Cameron and the woman Glenn was confessing to. Now, here's the problem. That other woman, the one those words were supposedly aimed at, took the stand herself, and she could not back up a word of it. She didn't remember Glenn saying any of it. She couldn't even remember Mary Cameron being in her apartment at all. And before the trial, she'd gone further. She told the prosecution flat out that Mary Cameron was lying. Think about that. The one person Glenn supposedly confessed to says she never heard it, and called the only witness who did a liar. But here's the part Rob needs you not to think about. Start with the wound itself. Brenda's body was examined by a medical examiner and a forensic pathologist. Here's what they did not find. Any sign that the killer's blade had broken. No snapped-off tip recovered from her body. Nothing in the medical evidence. Nothing says the murder weapon lost its point in that attack. So before we ever get to a knife in the woods, understand this. The only reason anyone is talking about a broken tip at all is because 2 people said the words, not the science, not the autopsy. And now the knife. That broken tipped knife in the woods, it wasn't found by the police. It wasn't found by luck. It was found by Brenda's grieving sister. And before she ever went looking, a psychic told her that her sister had been killed with a knife with a broken tip. Sit with that. The one detail Rob swears only a murderer could know was spoken out loud to the very woman who then walked into those woods and came back holding exactly what she'd been told she'd find. That's not a killer's secret leaking out. That's a suggestion, planted first and dug up second. Rob called it a confession. I call it a prophecy that went looking for its own proof. And the knife itself? No blood on it, no fingerprint, no DNA. In a year and a half of lying in the woods, it never gave up one thing that ties it to Brenda or Glenn or to anyone on this earth. And underneath every single piece of it, the thing I keep coming back to, the thing I cannot get past, not one fingerprint, not one drop of his blood, not a fiber, nothing. This was a frenzied killing, a throat cut, defensive wounds on her hands, blood across that frozen ground, a struggle in the dark, and out of all of that, the police tied nothing, not one physical thing, to Glenn. Meanwhile, a cab driver watched Brenda climb into a red truck with a bearded stranger at 2 a.m, and the prosecution's whole answer to that stranger was to whisper that the truck must have been Glenn's. Except 2 witnesses said Glenn didn't even get that red truck until after Brenda was already dead. So who was the bearded man in the red truck? That jury never got an answer. Neither have you. Now, the alibi, because I heard exactly what Rob did with it, and I'm going to answer it head on. A woman swore Glenn was with her at her apartment that whole night, and Rob wants you to throw her out because the 2 of them were close. But listeners, alibi witnesses are almost always people who you know. That's who you were with at 5 a.m. And that stranger question he supposedly asked her, whether she had anything to do with it, that's a man who's just learned his ex has been murdered, who already knows the police are circling him, grasping in the dark the way a frightened person does. You can read fear 100 different ways. The prosecution needs one of those readings to be true beyond a reasonable doubt, and they never, ever got there. So here's my ask, and it's not clever, it's just honest. I'm not going to tell you Glenn was a good man. You heard the same ugly things about him that I did. I'm asking you to be the juror you would pray for if it were your brother, your son, your father in that chair. On a record, this then. Reasonable doubt is not a loophole. It is not a technicality. It is the one thing, the only thing, standing between a hard, messy, unglamorous life and a cage he may never have earned. And there is too much doubt here. There is so much doubt here. I believe there is only one outcome. Acquit.
There's no judge in this room. Nobody's going to walk in and tell you who's right. There's just you, holding the same question 12 jurors held, with a man's whole life on it. Not did he probably do it. The question is, did the prosecution prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? Or are you being asked to convict on a chain of voices? Everyone with a reason to lie, a deal to chase, or no longer alive to be questioned at all. You've heard what they heard. The wall and the cracks. Now you do what they did. You decide. So here's how you vote. In the show notes, there's a link, convictoracquit.com. Tap it. 2 doors, convict or acquit. Choose one. That's your verdict on the record. And while you're there, tell me the one fact that decided it. The single brick or the single crack that you couldn't get past. Leave that in the comments box. You'll see how the room voted the moment you cast yours. And if you leave your email, I'll send you some of your fellow jurors' arguments, latest poll results, and verdict commentary straight to your inbox. So cast your vote now, because right after this break, I'm going to tell you what actually happened to Glenn Assoun. And something you're about to hear is going to stop you cold. Something that was hidden, on purpose, by the very people whose job was to find the truth. Cast your vote. Hold your side. The truth is 30 seconds away. Okay, the room is closed. The votes are in. And it was close. Closer than I expected. Which tells me you felt exactly what those 12 jurors felt. The pull of that wall of voices, and the doubt running through every crack in it. Now here's the part you came back for. What actually happened to Glenn Assoun in that courtroom and after. The jury convicted him, second-degree murder. Life, no chance of parole for 18 and a half years. Then he appealed. And in 2006, the Court of Appeal looked at everything you just heard, every weak witness, every crack, and upheld the jury's guilty verdict. The system studied this case twice, hard, and twice it said, he did it. He did not do it. Glenn Assoun was innocent. Completely. And here is the thing that was never in those files, because it was taken out of them. While Glenn sat in a cell, a police analyst was trying to trace a serial killer's victims. The killer's name was Michael McCrae, a man who stabbed vulnerable people, often sex workers, and left them where they fell. The analyst was combing through unsolved murders, looking for McCrae's pattern. And then he did something no one expected. He ran the cases that were already solved, the ones somebody had supposedly already answered for. And the database gave him a name. Brenda Way. McCrae had been living one street over from the lot where Brenda died, a few hundred feet away, and he cleared out a day or two after she was killed. The evidence pointing at him was sitting in a police file, the evidence that could have walked Glenn out of prison a free man. It was destroyed. Files against policy systematically wiped out. And it was never handed over. Not to Glenn's lawyers, not to the appeal court that was about to decide whether he'd spend the rest of his life behind bars. A federal review would later find it in black and white. Reliable information that could have changed everything, was simply never disclosed. So Glenn appealed. He put the whole case in front of a higher court and said, "Look again." But by the time those appeal judges opened the file, the one piece of evidence that could have set him free had already been destroyed. He never had a chance, because someone made sure he wouldn't.
I have to say something and I don't get to dress it up. I was wrong. I sat in this chair and I built that wall brick by brick, and I asked you to stand behind it with me. And I was wrong. But here's the part I can't shake. I didn't miss something obvious. I didn't get lazy, and I didn't stop caring about Brenda. I was wrong because the truth was kept from me, on purpose. The one piece of evidence that blew this whole thing apart, the serial killer living next door, that was pulled out of the file before it ever reached a courtroom. I built my case out of exactly what they wanted me to see, and nothing they didn't. 5 voices and a broken knife. I'd have walked into that jury room in 1999, voted guilty, and gone home that night sure I'd done right by her. And so would most of us. That's the nightmare of it. The people who put Glenn Assoon in a cell for 17 years weren't the villains. They were the careful ones. The reasonable ones. People trying to get it right, who never had a chance, because someone made sure they'd get it wrong.
Hey, don't carry it like that. You weren't wrong about the evidence. You were wrong about a lie. A lie they handed you on purpose. That's not the same failure. It's not even close. The whole system is supposed to protect us from exactly what happened here. And it didn't. It did the opposite. That's on it, not on you. Never on you.
Glenn Assoun spent nearly 17 years in prison for a murder he did not commit. He got out on bail in 2014, but he wasn't free. Ankle bracelet, curfew, the word murderer followed him everywhere. It took until 2019, a new trial, the Crown standing up and offering no evidence at all, before he finally heard the words he'd waited 2 decades for: not guilty. He was innocent. He had always been innocent, and it had cost him almost everything: his health, his years, his name. He died in 2023, worn down by what was done to him, still waiting for an accounting that never came. No public inquiry, no one held to answer. His youngest daughter put it as plainly as anyone could. She said, "We sit here without Dad, and we still live it." But he ever got to vote on. Because if Glenn didn't kill Brenda, then someone else did. The man the police's own analyst flagged was never charged with her murder. The lead died in the shredded file. So getting this wrong didn't only cost Glenn Assoun 17 years. It meant that whoever really stood in that lot with Brenda Way, whoever cut her throat while her neighbor's tires spun in the dark, walked away clean. Justice for Glenn was never justice for Brenda. 2 people were destroyed by the same lie, and only one of them ever made headlines. So let me end where we started, with her, Brenda Leanne Way, 28 years old, small and tough and full of love. The woman who'd spot you from a block away and come running. A daughter, a mother of 2. They called her Pitbull because she was fierce, because she was small, and she would not back down. She deserved so much better than that parking lot. And she deserved so much better than 20 years of the world getting her own murder wrong. We got to be the jury this week, and a lot of us, reasonable, careful, good, still got it wrong. For the most human reason there is. Someone made sure we would. So let's be the kind of jurors who never forget why, and the kind who remember them. Both of them. Look out for each other. I'll see you next case.